Dr. Roy Casagranda joins us on this pre-election Plutopia podcast. Roy has never been shy when it comes to calling out bad actors in the political arena. He does not disappoint on this episode of the Plutopia News Network.
Trump has said he's going to go after his enemies as soon as he becomes president. And he suggested that the military could be used, like the National Guard could be used. And he said that if people vote for him in this election, it will be the last election you will participate in. And he has said on day one, he's going to trash the Constitution. Like, he's telling us every single thing you need to know, just like Hitler did in Mein Kampf. All you had to do was read the book to know what he was going to do, because he told it. And he repeated it, by the way, over and over and over again, because he believed if you repeat the big line over and over and over again, eventually people will start to believe it, just like Trump does when he talks about the election was stolen. And so the parallels between him and Hitler are definitely there. I don't think he's as smart as Hitler was. And by the way, just for the record, I actually don't think Hitler was particularly smart. I think people tend to overvalue his intelligence. Almost every decision he made in World War II cost Germany the war.
Hey everybody, welcome to yet another episode of the Plutopia News Network podcast. I'm John Lepkowski, and my partner in crime on the Plutopia News Network is Scoop Sweeney. And we today are interviewing our friend Dr. Roy Casagranda, a professor of government at Austin Community College. Roy's multidisciplinary research falls at the intersection of politics, history, economics, psychology, and philosophy, which is like pretty much all the things that we need to be thinking about right now, or worrying about, or stressing about. Except I've been trying not to stress. I've been trying mostly to watch cartoons. So
I approve.
Yeah, it's dangerous to watch TV these days. You know, my wife, I have to get all the heavy objects away from her because she was watching Trump's latest that was going on when I came back into the studio, and I had to take him all because she likes to throw things at the TV if he's on. So I can't afford another TV.
Yeah.
Well, I should mention, so this podcast will be published the day before Election Day, 2024. And what we talk about here will be pretty fresh for Election Day, but we should keep in mind that we should be thinking beyond Election Day. And some of the things I want to talk about are more about what happens in the future, which is kind of hard to tell at this point, depending on how the election goes. But
Yeah.
First, I wanted to ask about the Austin School. What is the Austin School?
So,
And does it get confused with the University of Austin?
yeah, maybe. I came up with the name because I've always been inspired by the Frankfurt School. So it was an attempt to sort of plug that in. And then the thinking that I had was that I would bring in professors from around Texas, and they would contribute to it, and it would create this sort of cooperative lecture series. And it never really took. Like, I definitely got some material from other professors on, but it ended up pretty fast just evolving into the Dr. Roy show, which, you know, is fine, but then the name then was too big and too grand of a name for it. So it's just my YouTube channel with an occasional guest appearance.
And you've been giving lectures on there pretty steadily for a long time. I was watching some of the things that you've done, and they're pretty, you attract a lot of people, and there's quite a bit of discussion that goes along with your talks on YouTube, I've noticed. Do you have
the comment section?
Yeah, do you feel like you have kind of a community built around that?
Yeah, you know, when I first started doing it, I dreaded reading the comments because, you know, so much of it was just, so much of what we do on the web is stuff we would never do in a face-to-face situation. And I've always been appalled by that. I'm like, just imagine the person's in front of you before you post. In any case, as time went by, I noticed something that was sort of evolving, and that was that the comment section, there's still nasty stuff on there, but I've become immune to it, and I think it's hilarious. Recently I read something, I think it said all lies or all made up or something like that. I was like, all of it? Then I must be bad, because a good liar always bases their lies on the truth. You know what I mean? Like, anyway, so but for the most part, the comments are like, when there's an argument, it's really polite, and I find that really, really fascinating. I'm not used to polite arguments on the internet, so I beg to differ. Like, wow, you're begging to differ instead of calling the other person a moron. So
Yeah,
I
our
do think there's a community.
our YouTube channel, features a number of your appearances, and I have to say they registered huge audience, and I was just thrilled to see that. And no bad comments on your Plutopia appearances on our YouTube channel, whereas some others, we get some nasty stuff, and I will actually, roll those off, because some people post it's like a drive-by shooting, really.
Yeah.
That's how the YouTube universe works. Is you're either a really erudite person who's saying nice things, or you're a drive-by killer.
Yeah, I agree. There's some nasty stuff that gets posted, and sometimes I feel like the comments make so little sense. They have to be from bots, because there's no way that a person was this oblivious when they were making the comment.
So I have a very simple, sort of easy question to really get the ball rolling here, and that is, regardless of how this election goes that's coming up in a few days, where are we as a country? I mean, even if Harris wins, there's still an energized, some of us would say, fascist movement in the U.S. now, or is there? I mean, have we really settled the question of whether the MAGA version of the Republican Party is really a fascist movement?
I mean, there's no doubt that it's a fascist movement, and here's why. Fascism is the belief that there was some past place, some moment in time that was the ultimate moment in time, and that's when people were behaving the way they should be. Where men were men, women were women, and everybody understood their role in society. So if you're a German-style Nazi, then that moment in time was 1000 AD, when there were knights in shining armor and women were always damsels in distress. If you're an Italian fascist, that moment was probably somewhere around the year 1 AD, when there was this glorious Roman Empire. If you're an American fascist, then you probably really love the 19th century. Make America Great Again is really Make America 19th Century Again. And that looking back to the past automatically puts them in this category, because fascism has this sense of rejection of the present. It suggests that, things were better back then. So that's the core of it. Fascism is a weird ideology because there isn't really much more to it than that. It tends to lean towards being authoritarian, tends to be very misogynistic, right? Because there's one of the things that you're looking back to is you need the gender roles to be correct. And by correct, barefoot and pregnant women is really what they mean. So at its core, the MAGA movement definitely does all of that. One of the things that also has happened with the far right is there's almost always a central figure, a person that, a cult of personality kind of person that it revolves around. So here's the interesting thing. It's entirely possible that when Trump passes away, the movement will fizzle out, because at the end of the day, most of the cognitive dissonance revolves around him, because, right, That's what this is. The United States' new name should be United Cognitive Dissonance of America. And so if he goes, then I think a lot of it falls apart, unless another charismatic figure can step into his place and take over. So that's the catch.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I'm not real worried about J.D. Vance being a charismatic figure.
Yeah,
Sorry, Scoot,
he's
go
not
ahead.
him.
Yeah,
He's
if
not him.
Trump passes away, you have to remember that a lot of the people following him still believe that Elvis didn't die. So
That's true.
we
And
could
that they
have a
heard
new
this flash.
conspiracy theory that would go on and on and on.
Right. The only thing, though, is if there isn't that cult leader at the center of it, then I don't see how it turns into the kind of political movement that Trump has turned it into. You know, he's not the brightest guy in the world, but he knows how to manipulate people, and he knows how to be that guy that a person can look at him and they can see what they want to see, and that's brilliant if you're trying to take over a country and break its constitution and install yourself as a tyrant.
Yeah, the irony of the Madison Square Garden rally was not lost on me, because I remember reading about the German American Bund having rallies like that back in the 1930s. So it's like they're returning to their old home place.
Absolutely. I mean, he is on the record for having said on multiple occasions that he admires Hitler and that he wishes he had Hitler's generals. And yeah, don't get me wrong, Heinz Guderian and Erwin Rommel were brilliant. I don't kind of blame him for wanting Hitler's generals.
Goebbels, yeah. Goebbels.
Okay. Well, Goebbels was minister of propaganda. He wasn't a general. So,
but he was, I don't know, he was sort of like this guy Miller.
oh yeah,
sort of like the Miller
they even look
Bannon. Yeah, Miller looks a lot like Goebbels, that's for sure.
Probably a little Steve Bannon rolled in there too.
Yeah.
So why are intelligent people who are not necessarily, who may not even benefit from having a Trump presidency, why are they supporting Trump? I don't really understand exactly what the appeal is to people who are really, intelligent and thoughtful people.
This is something that has stumped our species since we've been thinking about these questions. I think there's a few things going on. So, I don't think there's one answer, and I don't think one size fits all. But I think it's safe to say that some of it is just, I hate women, or I hate brown people, or I hate black people. So the idea of voting for Kamala Harris is really just offensive to me. And Trump gives me the excuse to go vote for the white man. So there's some of that for sure. I've seen it. So I've experienced this anecdotally where the person was just stuck. That worked really well for Clinton, right? Because then if you're a misogynist and you just don't want a woman president, you have the excuse, you go vote for Trump. And then it didn't work with Biden, but it looks like it's working with Kamala. So there's at least an N of 3 that suggests there's something there. It's definitely not something that fits everybody, but it definitely fits a portion of the population. I also think that there is just this sense of cognitive dissonance, because Trump is in many ways the quintessential American. He is this guy who inherited his wealth instead of earning it. And let's be honest, most of us who are second and third generation had it a lot easier than our parents and grandparents or great-grandparents who are first generation, who had to work really hard to get us to this place. So there's a component of that I think we all kind of see. He's an exploiter. He is the guy that, isn't necessarily particularly talented. He's actually shockingly mediocre. and he has somehow managed to make it. And he sort of won the lottery of life. Like he's got a 80 IQ, but he pulls off being a billionaire and then loses $1 billion and then does a giant con and convinces everybody he's worth more than he is and sort of recovers. And so in a way, he exemplifies the, if I play the lottery, I have a chance of winning kind of mentality that a lot of us have. And he's transactional. Nothing is about relationships. He doesn't care about relationships. He can't wait to fire you. It's all about the transaction and what he can get out of it. And so he hits all of those greed buttons that so many people in the United States have tapped into. And so in a way, we're screw NATO, I'm an isolationist, we don't need the rest of the world, let's just pillage and plunder, I think strikes a chord in people who really want that to be the case. That, the United States did the right thing by stealing the United States from the Native Americans and by employing slave labor, and that somehow we earned being where we are, as opposed to you just got really lucky.
Yeah, it's kind of a simple-minded mindset there. I mean, his thoughts are not that complex, and most people are not, into complexity. They don't really look at the complexity of things, and they sort of shy away from things that really do get complimented, wicked problems. And science can be very complicated. And trying to get people, to coalesce and collaborate and work together and build a future can have a lot of complexity because people are so diverse.
Yeah.
So I think people feel it's like, man, I'm really tired of all this complicated stuff. This guy's a simple-minded dude, and I like him.
Yeah. And he says what's on his mind, which is, code for he's just as racist and sexist as I am. And I love that.
Yeah. And he doesn't care what anybody thinks about what he has
doesn't
to
care.
say.
He doesn't even care what he thinks because he'll contradict himself 3 times in the same sentence.
Well, it's kind of scary.
It's extremely scary because it's an indictment against the United States that he's doing so well and that he's probably going to win a second term here, because it shows that our education system really lacks, that we didn't do what was necessary to prepare our citizens for the ability to vote.
But there's a strong tradition of con men in the U.S., right? And he's sort of like the ultimate con man.
Yeah, especially when you look at the 19th century, there was one horrible president after the other. Even their names were terrible. And Chester Alan Arthur, like, oh my God, Millard Fillmore, you just want to punch them in the face. And they were charlatans, and they sort of exemplified this sort of transactionalism. But then came the 20th century, and there was a massive cleanup event. Don't get me wrong, there were still corrupt presidents, but when you look at the Roosevelts, or when you look at Eisenhower, when you look at Truman, they at least presented themselves in a dignified manner, and they at least pretended to be above politics. And there was sort of I don't know, a prestige and a way of being that Trump is incapable of doing. It's really amazing.
Yeah, government in the 19th century brought us the great things like the robber barons that, drove railroads across the country kind of wherever they wanted to and ran the railroads to any way they felt like. And Trump amazes me in that he's attracted all these businessmen to his side, even though he bankrupted a freaking casino. How bad do you have to be to send a casino it's like having your own money printing press, and he bankrupted it. And that's not, he bankrupted a beauty pageant. It boggles the mind to see that these people like Musk are flocking to him because he's a businessman. No, he's not. He's a criminal that destroys all of his businesses.
I remember hearing this with George Bush Jr. People would go, I want to vote for him because he's a businessman. Okay, maybe you want to vote for him because they're a businessman, but how about a successful businessman as opposed to a guy who keeps going bankrupt? Wouldn't that be something?
Careful,
Also,
some people think Elon Musk is a successful businessman, and I guess he is.
he's
I mean, he
also
is the
lost
richest guy in the
billions and
world.
billions and billions of dollars. So here's the thing: government isn't business, and trying to run government like a business is a really dumb idea. And the fact that there is a huge portion of the population like, I want that. You want Jeff Bezos running the government the way he runs Amazon. Like, is this have you thought this through? And the answer is no, because we just sort of go by emotions and impulses.
Well, this gets to something that has really worried me because we pride ourselves in having this democratic intention. We are a democracy. The MAGA people don't care as much about that, but the U.S. has a strong tradition of saying we're a democracy and we're proud of it and we think it's great. But democracy has that problem. It has a problem that to the extent that you're going to the people to make decisions about things, you have a lot of people who don't really understand the thing they're making the decision about. And we try to mitigate that by having the Republican form, the representative government, where the representatives themselves are supposed to sort of make themselves smart about the decisions that they make, but that's not inherently something they're going to do. I mean, imagine Marjorie Taylor Greene like researching something to make a good decision about it, So,
Yeah.
so there's a whole question about democracy here. We would not have Trump, but it really wasn't democratic because Hillary Clinton won the popular vote in that election. So we would have Clinton as president now if we were more democratic. But, we had this sort of like bastardized version of democracy that gave us Trump. The whole idea is that people vote. But then on the other hand, if you depend on a small number of people or you have this like strong man president, which is kind of what these guys, they want to have a strongman president, but they don't care whether he is smart or will make good decisions. They just kind of like the guy, so they want to put him in there. I mean, the real question is, how do we get to a point where we have a form of governance that makes good, intelligent decisions and is supportive of the well-being of all people? And I can't figure out how to get there. Seems like a wicked problem.
It is a wicked problem, but I think culturally the United States has put itself in a cul-de-sac, so to speak. And part of the problem was Reagan slashed education funding, and here we are 44 years later, and we're a country of morons. And it's like, that's weird. I wonder if it had something to do with the education funding cuts. So if you look at Scandinavia, there has been a rise of the right in Scandinavia, right? Like the Sweden Democrats, the fascist party in Sweden, is in the coalition government. So you're in trouble when the fascist party is one of the coalition members in Sweden. But so the whole planet has shifted to the right. There has been a massive shift to the right. In the United States, though, there's a compounded effect, which is, at least in Sweden, most people can read, right? In the United States, the reading level is what, a 6th grade reading level? Like it's appallingly low. The way I kind of think of this is Gen X. So I'm an X generationer, so this is me attacking my own generation a little bit. If you were a white guy in the 90s, you were Gen X, you were probably listening to musicians who are really, really angry and really, really whiny, like whiny, angry. Don't get me wrong, I still listen to that music. But why? Why growing up in the suburbs or a bunch of middle and upper middle class rich white boys so angry and so whiny and so irritated that the music they needed to listen to was, a little harsh on the ear. And what I'm left with is that we have become such a transactional society that we are so wrapped up in our own consumerism, that we are so divorced from the members of our community and isolated, in part by the way we build our houses, which is, I want my house as far away from the other guy as possible, and I'm going to throw up a 6-foot privacy fence, although I've been noticing 8-foot privacy fences lately. And so that you can't look into my backyard for reasons nobody knows, because what's back there, that it's probably just a grass lawn. It's probably boring as hell to look at. And you're probably not naked out there very often. So why do you need this privacy fence? Like, it's such a
Speak
weird...
for yourself, buddy.
Okay, well,
sorry.
No,
keep going.
So I think there's something got left behind, and we don't have a cause. Like, what's the United States' goal? For a while, we had a cause. The cause was to get to the moon. The cause was to fight for civil rights. The cause was to stop the war in Vietnam. The cause was to liberate women. But we've sort of derailed all of that. We mock the 60s and pretend like that wasn't a glorious revolution. We want to get tax cuts. We don't care about our community anymore. The Golden Gate Bridge. It's one of the strangest things to ever happen. People in the San Francisco Bay Area realized that they needed this bridge at a time of economic turmoil and downturn, so that there was no way to really fund it except to take out mortgages on everybody's houses. So the bill to build the Golden Gate Bridge required the counties surrounding San Francisco Bay to allow their people's homes to go into a mortgage on a bank loan so that they would have the money to build it. We would never vote for something like that. People would be like, that's communist. You're interfering with my property rights. But back then, people were like, oh, this will really help the community, and we kind of need it, and we're in economic downturn, and this will be good it'll create jobs, right? People were thinking in a different way just 90 years ago, in a way that allowed for them to make decisions that were in the best interest of the community, and I think we've lost that.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is it's like we've lost our innocence. And, we spend a lot of time studying and thinking about and talking about media. And I look at media, look at the way films have changed. It used to be that they sort of enforced a kind of like goodness in film, like if a guy killed somebody, he couldn't really get off. He had to pay for it in the end, and that sort of thing. The whole, what was it, the Hayes office or whatever, that sort of required films to present things with a kind of, it was a fairly simplistic morality, but they had to have this moral dimension that is pretty much completely missing now. And a lot of what we see in our media is representations of people doing really terrible things and often, benefiting from it or getting away with it. And I don't know whether that's a reflection of the culture or whether it's shaping the culture or maybe both.
Yeah, I mean, that's the fun thing about those types of things. They're always feedback loops, right? It's feeding the culture, but it's also because of the culture. Yeah, I mean, when you were describing films today, and that where you could get away with the bad thing and the film could end that way, my thought was, oh, it's just reality. It's just how how the world works. Bad people do bad things and get away with it all the time.
So we start accepting it because that's what's being fed back to us. Whereas there was a time when we carried an assumption, because it was reinforced over and over again, that if you do a bad thing, you don't get away with it.
Yeah.
So now we have Trump. And Trump has proved that you can do one bad thing after another and get away with it, and that people will embrace you for it. It's just crazy. And that brings me to, so I have another question, which is about, there are these comparisons to Hitler and Nazi Germany that people are making with Trump and his buddies these days. I tend to think that Trump is a little more benign than Hitler was, but, that he's basically just kind of an idiotic dork who's completely opportunistic. whereas Hitler, I think, had some like demonic energy to him or whatever. But I wonder about, some people are worried about potential genocide. Do we see in MAGA a set of people who would become so evil that they would actually start murdering whole swaths of people, you know? Is that, what is MAGA really? Is MAGA really another iteration of that kind of occult evil practically?
So I think some of what we're talking about actually emerged in 2008. Obviously, it's got its roots even further back. 1607 comes to mind. Also, by the way, 1968 with the election of Nixon. But in 2008, there was something that I noticed that was kind of shocking, which was the reaction to Obama being elected. So I actually gave this example recently, but I had a friend of 17 years whom I never heard him say anything racist. He definitely said misogynistic things, but this the time. But I never heard him say anything racist, and he was a dear person to me. I traveled to him, he traveled to me, and when Obama got elected, he lost his mind. He started dropping the N-word all the time, and he would say things like, "Why can't David Duke go shoot this guy?" And it was this shocking moment for me. And then around me was the political atmosphere, the birther movement, which of course Trump was definitely involved in. Saying, well, Obama's not a citizen. He can't be president. He's not eligible to be president. Or even if he is a citizen, he's not eligible because he wasn't born in the United States. And what's really fascinating about that is there's this document, I don't know if y'all are familiar with it, it's called the Constitution. It's written in English, by the way. You can go read it. It's actually very thin. It's a very short document. There's hardly any words in it. If you read the section on eligibility to be president, it doesn't say that you have to be born in the United States. It says you must be a natural born citizen. So in other words, it doesn't actually matter where Obama was born necessarily. It's just a requirement that he be a natural born citizen. So there are two ways to be a natural born citizen. One is to be born in the United States. If your parents are undocumented immigrants and you're born in the United States, you are a natural born citizen. You are eligible to be president of the United States. Done. The other way that you can become a natural born citizen is if you are born outside the United States to US citizens and those citizens report your birth within a certain time frame. I don't know what it is. It's a relatively short time frame, but as long as they report it, you're okay. Well, that's why Ted Cruz can run for president. He was born in Canada. He wasn't born in the United States. But also it's worth pointing out, it's why John McCain could run for president. He was born in Panama. So there were people who had voted for a guy born in Panama who then turned around and went, "Oh no, Obama wasn't born in the United States. He can't run for president." And it does, and the disconnect never manifested itself in their brains. That's really amazing cognitive dissonance. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't occur to you that this is strange, that you're mad at this one guy. And of course, last time I checked, we annexed Hawaii. It wasn't like it was a voluntary thing for Hawaii. So the whole conversation, I think, revealed something that was really toxic in the United States. And I don't know that we've ever sat down and done the work to get past it, but it does make me think that there are elements in the United States that would be willing to commit evil, not just because of the Fred Murrah building, right? We can point to events where stuff happened, but also just simply the rise of the militias. And then, the Charlottesville protest. And there were good people on both sides, as you'll recall.
Well, there are good people on both sides. Just that frightens me when I hear that. But there are some bad people right in this neighborhood. San Marcos has their own MAGA clan, apparently, who's going around tagging people's Harris signs with a note that they've been registered in the MAGA Clan number 124 database of people they're going to come and get after Trump wins the election. And the law enforcement down there is actually taking it seriously because it's apparently been going on for a while. So who in the heck is going to put out a Harris sign because they've got the MAGA Klan coming around? That's a real chilling effect there. But racism didn't just get invented by Donald Trump. It's been around for a long time, but it's become popular now.
Yes, I think that's the thing. He ripped off the Band-Aid, and now if you are a racist, you can just openly be one, and it's okay. Whereas before we had the Archie Bunker effect, where we saw All in the Family, we saw how idiotic Archie Bunker looked, and so we went out of our way to pretend we weren't that guy and hide our racism and our sexism and our homophobia. I think that, oh wow, this is it. Oh, that is something. Wow. So what's interesting about this note is Trump has said he's going to go after his enemies as soon as he becomes president. And he suggested that the military could be used, like the National Guard could be used. And he said that if people vote for him in this election, it will be the last election you will participate in. And he has said on day one, he's going to trash the Constitution. Like, he's telling us every single thing you need to know, just like Hitler did in Mein Kampf. All you had to do was read the book to know what he was going to do, because he told it. And he repeated it, by the way, over and over and over again, because he believed if you repeat the big lie over and over and over again, eventually people will start to believe it, just like Trump does when he talks about the election was stolen. And so the parallels between him and Hitler are definitely there. I don't think he's as smart as Hitler was. And by the way, just for the record, I actually don't think Hitler was particularly smart. I think people tend to overvalue his intelligence. Almost every decision he made in World War II cost Germany the war. So the irony was, is if he had let the generals run the war, they still might not have won, but they would have definitely done better. But in the case of comparing Trump to Hitler, yeah, he might not be as nasty and he might not be as talented, but he's just as dangerous, because dumb people in the White House can cause serious harm, including triggering a war by accident or misjudging the ability to pull off something economically. Like, this isn't a game you want to play.
Well, famously, in his first administration, there were people and there were guardrails that sort of kept him from doing as much damage as he might have done.
Yeah.
And I guess the big question now is whether those kinds of people will be around and whether those guardrails will hold for another 4 years,
And so I think that was a big question in political science for years. What's more important, the institutions or the leaders? And it would, back and forth, and there would be evidence this direction and evidence that direction. And I think most people believe still, and definitely have believed over the last few decades, that the institutions are what matter, and that the institutions have safeguards in place to prevent the republic from being taken over or derailed. The problem is the president appoints the White House staff and the president appoints the cabinet. And, unless the Senate decides not to approve the cabinet members, which is possible, he'll have the cabinet of his choice. And even if he doesn't have the cabinet of his choice, he'll just run the country through the White House staff, because there is no approval process for the White House staff. The president technically doesn't need a cabinet because of the way the White House staff is formulated. And so at the end of the day, he can overrun the institutions. He can completely ignore what they're supposed to do. He can fire the members of the cabinet when he doesn't like them, which is what he did in his first term. And he has said, I'm not going to appoint those kinds of people. He has made it clear he's going to appoint sycophants and he's going to appoint yes men.
Yeah, there's a question about the military. The military, like the generals, they swear an oath to the Constitution, not to the president. And I hear that there are some generals who take that, or most generals take that very seriously. So if Trump tries to like leverage the military, like to suppress people or whatever, I just wonder if he can really get much traction there, or will they basically say, well, our oath is not to you, it's to the Constitution, and you're asking us to defy the Constitution.
Yeah, Hitler got around that by tricking the army into swearing an oath that did go to him. And once they had done it, they felt like, oh, do we take this oath seriously? And, the majority of them ended up deciding they swore the oath, they have to take it seriously. So hopefully the US military will avoid that kind of pitfall. But as a general rule, soldiers tend to really stick to oaths. Like they really matter. They're not just a symbolic gesture. And so to that extent, I agree that I could totally see generals standing up to him. We had that happen. James, according to multiple sources, Trump ordered the United States military to attack Iran and to attack Venezuela. And in both cases, James Mattis simply ignored the order. Now, James Mattis, when he was Secretary of Defense, had no authority to ignore the order. He was breaching the Constitution, but he just did it. He refused to participate. So we got lucky, as I think the way we need to think about it. But going forward, I don't know why anybody would believe that we would be lucky next time, because he's not going to appoint James Mattis. He knows better, especially since Mattis likes to mock him and call him names. So, I just don't see why we would give a guy a second chance after he tried to do a coup d'etat. Like, to me, that just should have eliminated any possibility of him ever running for anything ever again. If I had known you could do a coup d'etat and run for office, I'd have been doing coup d'etats for the last 40 years, like once a year. I'm just blown away. I just assumed I'd get in trouble and go to prison or be killed or something.
Well, we were talking quite a bit as though we kind of assume, or what would happen if Trump won. So what happens if Harris wins? Harris wins the election. The vote count is completely in her favor. She even wins by a landslide. Then what? What do our MAGA folks do? Is there going to be another insurrection?
I mean, I think we should just assume the United States is so divided that no matter who wins, the possibility of civil war is on the table. That the possibility of insurrections or rebellions or just violence, terrorism, is on the table. I don't think we should be naive and rule that out. I do think it's worth pointing out that if I keep hearing Kamala painted as some sort of radical progressive. She's not a radical progressive. She's an old style neoliberal, and when she gets into power, she's going to do basically what Biden did, which wasn't the most horrible presidency we've ever seen by any means, but it wasn't anything revolutionary. There was no meaningful change. There was no, the economy grew under Biden. It grew at a faster pace than inflation did, so we ended up ahead. There was a lot of whining and complaining. If you were lower class, you definitely ended up ahead. I mean, think about it. Under Biden, our effective minimum wage is now $15 an hour. It's not the official, it's still $7.25 or whatever, but basically our minimum wage doubled. So a bunch of lower class people had their income doubled. Well, on top of that, though, we had 20% inflation. Well, 20% inflation means you're still 60% ahead. So the lower class definitely got an income boost. So that's great if the only thing you care about is the economy. But there were no major social changes. There was no serious, improvement in access to education necessarily. We started to see a unionization process, but we're where we were in the year 1900 because the Reagan guys did such a great job of destroying the unions in the United States. We're starting over. It's going to take us decades. I still can't believe the way Biden interfered in the railroad strike because he didn't want to interrupt Christmas. I think people don't remember what the railroad strike was about. They wanted sick leave. They didn't want 20 days of sick leave. I think they wanted 3 days of sick leave because they get 0 days of sick leave. I don't know about you, but the idea that there's this multi-ton thing flying down a railroad track carrying chemicals and petroleum, I like the idea that the railroad workers don't have to report to work sick. It just and Biden stepped in and they didn't and interfered in a way so that they couldn't strike and forced them to accept a contract without sick leave. They still don't have sick leave. It's 2024. The United States still doesn't have maternity leave. It's 2024. We're the only country on earth that doesn't have paid maternity leave. Like, what is that? Fourth world countries manage to have paid maternity leave. Like, I don't understand. So the answer is that if we get Kamala, we're just going to have more of the same.
Well, people may not remember that Donald Trump is not the first racist presidential candidate. I covered one back in 1972 named George Wallace, who actually destroyed the Democratic Party in Texas. It turned it from being, the Democratic Party in Texas was a fairly racially challenged party until the McGovern candidacy came along, and all of the Wallace Democrats decided to become Republicans. So you had a sea change there. Suddenly, the Texas Democratic Party was a more liberal party, and the Republicans were the racist party now because all the Wallace supporters went over there. Because my dad was a Texas Republican, but he was kind of challenged by the fact that suddenly it didn't smell the same as before the Wallace folks kind of took over. The Wallace Democrats migrated to the GOP.
Yeah, that was Barry Goldwater's strategy in '64. He wanted to get the conservative, racist Democrats in the South to vote for him, and it didn't work enough, right? But he did get Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina. So he won Arizona, and he won the 5 deep South states. And then, of course, George Cornwallis ran American Independent Party in 1968, and then again in '72. In '68, he won Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and Arkansas. So swap out South Carolina with Arkansas, and is the last third-party candidate to ever win an electoral college delegate. And then in 1972, he didn't win any electoral college delegates. But you're right, this is the path that they took. And Reagan used it to successfully get into the White House in 1980, and all those Democrats ran over and voted for him. And then in the aftermath of that, little by little, the South went from being a bastion of the Democratic Party to the bastion of the Republican Party. So sometimes I hear people say, the party switched places. What happened wasn't that the party switched places, it's that the racist part of the Democratic Party moved over and joined the Republican Party. And that obviously is going to have policy impacts, because you're right, then the Democratic Party is left with the liberals, because the Democratic Party used to be a coalition of liberals and conservatives. And then the Republican Party was a coalition of libertarians and populists. And what's really hilarious about that is libertarians and populists believe opposite things, and conservatives and liberals believe opposite things. So the two parties just look shockingly moderate, because by the time the two factions within each party compromise, they kind of landed in a similar space. So what Reagan did was he polarized the parties and made them ideological. What the politicians have done since is they've turned all of the conversations we should be having into emotional conversations. So instead of having real policy choices, we're talking about whether or not we should ban drag queens and, ban people from using bathrooms if they're transgender. Like these are nonsensical non-issues. We need to be talking about global warming and the fact that our children are going to have a 40-year life expectancy. Right? We need to be talking about we're heading towards a civil war and a world war at the same time.
Yeah, it strikes me as really odd that I was watching, what was it? Bill Maher had Megyn Kelly on the other night, and these were the things that she was stressing. And, the two things that you're hearing from people like Kelly, Republicans, people who are speaking more or less for the party, if you listen to them talk, you would think the only two things they care about is open borders, which of course are not really open, and boys using the girls' restroom, which in other words means people who are transgender, and they're not going to accept that, gender dysphoria is a thing and that a boy can really think of himself as a girl. So if you have someone who is truly transgender going into the girls' restroom but was born a boy, then that's an abomination, that an abomination that may happen in like 1% of the country at any given time. Yeah. It almost never happens. And the whole thing about open borders is, it's ridiculous. We do not have open borders. Apparently what they're talking about is the fact that Biden was unwilling to put people in cages or, force them back across the border because the law really didn't allow him to do that. But Trump, kind of overrode that and was happy to throw out as many people as he could. But everybody agrees. The Democrats and the Republicans are all in agreement that there's a problem with immigration and that it needs to be addressed. So I would have thought that would have weakened their border arguments, but they're still doubling down on that. And they're still doubling down on this transgender thing, and which actually it suggests not just a problem with transgender, but it suggests a kind of homophobia that, is troubling for people who are LGBTQ and have, been pretty much accepted within most of the society now. And now they've got to worry about these bullies coming after them, instigated by some politicians who are essentially homophobic.
Yeah. So the immigration thing baffles me for a couple of reasons. One, we had a deal that was worked out between the Republicans and Democrats, and Trump shot it down. So the irony of ironies is he created the scenario where he could talk about immigration because he created the problem. Having said that, I still don't get why Americans are so obsessed with immigration. What I really want them to do is write it in Cherokee. Like, explain to me in an essay in Cherokee, or it could be, like Apache or Ojibwa or something. But, use it in a native voice. Explain to me why immigration is bad. I bet if we asked the Cherokee to come up with an explanation why immigration is bad, they could.
Fairly obvious.
Yeah. I had a cousin, and we got into a calm conversation about it, and he said, I don't like what immigrants are doing in the country. And I said, you mean like bringing hamburger and spaghetti and pizza and tacos? And he goes, well, I don't like what the immigrants are doing in the country. And I go, show me what they're doing to the country you don't like so that I can see if I agree with you. And he couldn't do it. He just kept looping. I don't like what they're doing. Well, what are they doing?
It's like accepting jobs that nobody else will do.
Yeah.
Right. So picking blueberries.
Yeah, they have looked at the impact of if Trump is able to deport all the immigrants. There would be a devastation of the American economy because there are a lot of jobs that have been filled by immigrants. And you don't see a lot of, blonde white folks going out and doing those jobs. And you can't expect them to volunteer to do it if they expel all the immigrants. So, the economics involved with that is it just doesn't work, and Trump has avoided addressing that.
Oh, I figured out what their solution for that is, though. When you get all the immigrants out of the country and you don't have anybody to do those jobs, then you just get the kids out of their public schools and put them to work and basically get kids to do those jobs. Yeah. Child labor.
Child labor. One of the things that's also interesting to me about the immigration argument is I think it's about 1.5 million people move to the United States every year. And that's about how many people we had moving to the United States every year 125 years ago. But our population is more than triple what it was 125 years ago. So if the number is the same and our population is more than triple, that means that our immigration rate is about 30% where it was 125 years ago. In other words, as a percentage of the population, immigration goes down every year. It's not this is just xenophobia. This is just good old-fashioned racism. People are freaking out about a non-event because they don't like the color of the skin of the people that are coming in.
Well, I mean, the idea is that the Democrats are bringing people of color into the country because they will make them all Democrats and overrun the Republican Party with all these people that they've immigrated. The great replacement theory.
Right.
And it's just crazy.
It's nonsense and crazy. But if you're really worried about being replaced, I'd like to suggest having a positive birth rate instead of a negative birth rate. The fact that white people in the United States have such a big negative birth rate, between the 2010 and the 2020 census, there were 7 million fewer white people. It's not just that whites are shrinking as a percentage of the population, they're shrinking as an actual number by the millions. And it's like, at that point, pandas, I don't know, like you won't have sex to reproduce. Nobody can have sympathy for you. Don't be violent about it. Make love, not war.
Yeah, the great replacement. John and I actually experienced the benefits of being replaced, supposedly. Our high school in Big Spring, Texas, was one of the first to be desegregated. And we had, before the desegregation, there was a black high school and junior high on the other part of town, and they did away with that, and they brought all these African-American students in, and all of a sudden we had a winning football team and a winning basketball team, and the racists really shut up and left it alone. But they were really outraged when they said, we're going to have these African-American folks come over and be with our little white kids. It's like, it was no longer a deal when they had a winning football team.
I think I saw that movie. Denzel Washington is in it.
I heard somewhere that the reason that there's such a fervor about abortion within the Republican Party, that they're so opposed to abortion, is because if they allow abortions, there will be fewer white children born. And they seem to be coming from an attitude that women are mostly vessels to carry children, and that is their true worth. That's also kind of crazy, but it seems to be a factor in all this.
It definitely is a factor in this, because I agree with you. Like, there's this fear, like, oh, white women, affluent white women will go have abortions because whatever. The reality is if you want to cause birth rates to drop, give people money and an education, and their birth rates will drop. Ironically, if you ban abortion in the United States, the population of Black people and brown people will also increase because they're also getting abortions. So their math doesn't really work. But it's funny.
I'm thinking about how Margaret Atwood recently said, "I told you so."
Yeah. So I've been watching the TV series. Season 1 was amazing, but it has sort of fizzled a little bit because the story kind of got lost. But my wife keeps asking me, why are you watching that horrible show? And I'm like, well, I want to know what the future is going to be like.
Well, speaking of the future, we're about out of our hour here. Do you have any prediction? Are you willing to post a prediction pre-election, since this is going to air the day before the election?
Yeah. Okay. So
you want to go on record?
in January 2019, I posted on Facebook Biden-Harris, and it was 2019, right? The primaries were the next year. So it was before the primaries. We had just done the 2018 election. And people were like mad at me because they didn't like my choice. And I said, no, this isn't my choice. This is my prediction. I think that this will be the ticket, and that's who's going to win. So I'm saying this because I'm trying to create a little bit of background. I have from time to time predicted election outcomes. I have no idea where this one is going. And so not only did I not make a prediction 2 years ago, I don't know what's going to happen in 7 days. If the election happened today and the polls are accurate, I think Trump walks away with the win. But I don't know what to do with the polls. And
the polls are not accurate.
Yeah, I just don't know. Like, they haven't been accurate since 2016, so we can't rely on them. We're not sure what they even tell us anymore.
They could be inaccurate in either direction. I'm actually very critical of news organizations for reporting polls as though they were actually news, and as though they were actually a measure of the sentiment of the population. You should never say 70% of Americans believe blah, blah, blah. You should say 70% of those polled believe blah, blah, blah. Because a poll is just a poll, right?
Yeah,
right.
I tend to ignore the Fox polls and the Wall Street Journal polls for obvious reasons of ownership, and they have been all over the place lately.
Yeah, and so I think it could go either way. Like, the polls could be underreporting Trump, or they could be overreporting Trump. I just have no idea at this point. It could be that Trump is going to walk away with a huge landslide victory, or he's going to lose like he did in 2020. So I'm stuck. I don't know. I wish I had an idea. I guess we'll find out in 7 days.
Well, there's a guy named Simon Rosenberg who has, I guess, a podcast, the Hopium Chronicles, and he is absolutely convinced that Harris will win, and he's very optimistic and positive, and he refers to that as hopium. So I guess hilarious. You could get addicted to hopium,
Well, let's hopium he's right.
Yeah, really. All right. So thank you so much, Roy, for joining us. This has just been great.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. I hope we'll come back again.
Are we going to do a post, like a lament together event, like we did 4 years ago?
We should. You want to come back in a couple of weeks and do another one? Okay, cool.
What I remember happening 4 years ago is the election got hung, and when I got on the show, I said, no, guys, don't worry. Kamala's got this, or something to that effect. We just need to wait for, not Kamala, but Biden, we need to wait for the numbers to roll out. Maybe we'll be in that situation again, another hung election.
So sometime between now and January 6th, we'll schedule another discussion, and then we'll be predicting not what's going to happen with the election, but what's going to happen with the inauguration.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ron.
Take care.
You can follow the Plutopia News Network at plutopia.io. On Facebook, go to @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. With John Lepkowski, I'm Scoop Sweeney. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.